welcome back to the Tiki Talk Show. I'm Ryley.
And I'm Ellie.
And today we're bringing you another episode in our series on the Mai-Kai and talking to all the people who brought it to the forefront of the Tiki revival space. Today we're talking with Mr. Tim Swanky Glazner, the historian on the Mai-Kai, the historian on Donn the Beachcomber, and one of the co-founders of the famous Hukilau.
You may remember from our Christy White episode that the Hukilau didn't have its original home that first year. They started out at Trader Vic's, and we talked to Tim about this. And eventually, they made the move to the Mai-Kai, where the Hukilau, even though it's grown over the years, the people who really have invested so much time into making it the event that it is have grown to be like family with their hosts at the Mai-Kai. Tim has taken the time to really gather a history of people who are involved with the Mai-Kai because he loves the place so much. He spoke with people who are no longer with us today and has really put their stories together as a way to preserve them and keep them from disappearing. He put all of those stories together into the book he wrote in 2016 on the Mai-Kai. He literally wrote the book on it.
It's a great book. It really comes off as an absolute love letter to the Mai-Kai, to use a semi-cliche term, but through this interview and his other interviews, the book, it really does come off like that. Tim knew these people personally. He knew of countless stories of people who've worked there for decades, people who brought their kids into the business later on in life. And this book really does an amazing job. While researching it, Tim has also said that he was incidentally collecting stories on Donn the Beachcomber, because some of us may know the Mai-Kai hired away bartenders and managers from Donn the Beachcombers, and which inspired Tim to write his next book on the Donn the Beachcomber himself. And through this interview, you're going to hear us talk about it, but he talks with a number of people who were extremely close with Donn, some very intimate friends and family members, people who knew him for decades in business. And again, Tim is a preservationist. He wants to continue these stories. At the end of the interview, you hear us talk a little bit about a post he made on Tiki Central over 20 years ago about how easy all of these things that we love can go away and how we need to appreciate them for what they are now.
I hope you enjoy this interview because we had so much fun. We're definitely looking forward to Tim's book, where he really separates who Donn is from the man of myth and mystery into the truly incredible adventures that his real life was. And we appreciate his work. It's so similar to the work that we do here every week, collecting people's stories, putting together that oral history so that they don't disappear, they don't go away, and the love of Tiki is here forever.
So thank you again, Tim. We really appreciate you coming on, and we hope you all enjoy this interview. So over to Tim.
Hi, and welcome back to the Tiki Talk Show. I'm Ellie.
And I'm Ryley.
And today we're joined by Mr. Tim Swanky Glazner. How are you, sir?
I'm good. It's
Awesome.
technical difficulties, but we're there.
Yes, we are.
We made it through it.
Yes.
Everybody who's been to one of my symposiums can tell you the technical difficulties come with the. It always managed to work, but it's always a hassle.
Well, we appreciate you weathering the storm and being here with us.
Yeah.
Can you start by just giving the listener a little introduction of yourself and telling us how you got into Tiki?
Well, I guess for some people, I'm best known as the co-founder of Hukilau, the second oldest and largest Tiki event in the world. And for some people, I'm better known for the book I wrote about the Mai-Kai and the official Mai-Kai historian. That book came out about 10 years ago. And now I'm about to release a biography of Donn the Beachcomber early next year. So that's about 10 years, 10 years between books. So the next one will be in 2036. I don't know. I've written for magazines, and I do seminars around the country on Tiki history. Created a carving seminar or carving weekender, done a few different events and just stuff in the Tiki community as a Tiki historian and event organizer and just general, I call it a jerk of all trades. No, I'm not the jack of all trades, because jack of all trades are really good at everything. I'm just kind of okay at everything. But it started for me, that in when I came up in the mid '80s and '90s, um, I a lot of us folks of that time were rediscovering the '50s and '60s, '40s, '50s, and '60s, because we grew up seeing the leftovers of that, the architecture and growing up with the TV shows and John Wayne or whatever. And like myself, and my friends, we stole our parents' record collections and started listening to this music and hearing Glenn Miller for the first time and hearing funky psychedelic music and rediscovering all of these aspects of the mid-century. And in that time, in the '80s and '90s, there were a whole lot of subculture based on those eras. There was the huge rockabilly culture, and there still is. There was lounge, there was exotica, there was a hippie culture. That was when the Dead was touring, and so and you could go to what the things that really made it powerful were thrift stores were full of this stuff from the '50s and '60s, and it was dirt cheap. Shirts were $1, pants were $1, suits. You could go get a sharkskin suit from the '50s that was amazing for like $3.
Yeah.
And it was just ubiquitous. And so we were all, and there were, I knew there were people in the scene. We called them lifers. They had a '50s car. They lived in a '50s home. They wore '50s clothing. I mean, down to their underwear, new old stock underwear. And they lived their life like they were in the '50s because it was so abundant and everywhere and cheap. And what was driving us all forward was that we felt like we were discovering for the first time. That if you're into preservation, there's a saying: if it's 50 years old, they tear it down. If it's 100 years old, they preserve it. In other areas of culture, it's more like 25 and 50. If it's 25 years old, they tear it down. If it's 50 years old, they keep it. But for people like me who didn't grow up when they were building Googie architecture, it was new and interesting. And so we all had a great interest in it, where those folks who actually lived through it, it was just something that happened. They didn't value it like we did.
Mhm.
And so there's like the book Googie architecture. Googie wasn't even a term, and nobody was appreciating that architecture. And in the '90s, in 1991, I went to Trader Vic's for the first time in Atlanta, and I don't even remember it. My friend told me that we did, but that was just one of many places we went. There were these old school places that were really cool, and there was no term tiki then, so I didn't even know that it was a thing.
Mhm.
But as I was collecting records and could see back here the hundreds of records I still have, and there was a group called the Exotica group and the internet also propelled all of these people to get together and do things. And the Exotica group led me to the Tiki Central group. And then I discovered Tiki being its own thing. And that's how I got there. It was just a part of this mid-century interest that I had. And the thing that the, the people of my age who were instrumental in all of this, um, had the luxury of it being new and being cheap, and we were discovering it. You went to Tiki Central every day to see what new place somebody found, or some mug that they discovered, or a menu, or the things that nobody had ever seen before. And this was probably also true for rockabilly. They discover some band, and that artist is still alive, and they still performing somewhere in Iowa or something.
Yeah.
So it made a very uh, it was a different experience. And so for my generation, Tiki was all about vintage. It was about the old places and the old things and rediscovering that, and going to an old place and having terrible cocktails, or just having beer because you knew the drinks were going to be terrible, but it was this place from out of time. And today It's about new places because there are new places and there aren't that many old places still existing. And so Tiki has kind of changed, but in that era it was all this new thing, and it was something we were all discovering together. That and then we were all defining it. When Book of Tiki came out, that really it became a term and it became a set of design elements that Sven had put together that defined what Tiki was and made this era that we then discovered. It started in 33 with Donn the Beachcomber and reached its peak in the 60s. And it became a thing that it wasn't before because of Sven and other people who kind of unearthed it.
When we look back on those early days, a lot of it was DIY, but a lot was focused in Southern California. People like Sven and Jeff, Otto, they were all in Southern California, and you were not. So you mentioned that you had Tiki Central to be able to reach out to folks. What were you doing in your local area? Did you have any meetups or anything like that, or how did you start getting people involved in off the internet?
Well, it had been to a bunch of rockabilly events, and I had the notion, Kaliki and I had the notion that we were going to do a rockabilly event. There were a lot of vintage hotels in the area. I worked up in Pigeon Forge, which is a really touristy area, but there were still vintage hotels there and there were vintage theaters, and I thought could put something together. And then in 2001, we went to Teaserama in New Orleans, which was put together by Otto and Baby Doe, and it was a burlesque event. This was another subculture that was being reimagined and re-examined, and there were uh, older burlesque performers who were there, and then there was Dita Von Teese and people that we all know now, and we're probably 40 or 50 acts that weekend. It was another inspiration for, you can just do this, you can just put these things together. And I met Tiki Central folks for the first time there, obviously Otto and Baby Doe, but other people from Tiki Central and the other Exotica group that I met there. And so right after that, they did the first Tiki Oasis, which we'd heard about. And then a bunch of people said they were coming to Atlanta to Trader Vic's. I mean, somebody said, "Hey, I'm going to be at Trader Vic's Atlanta in 6 months for a business trip. Who wants to meet me?" And that became Hukilau. That person said that, and then like before you know it, 20 people said they were going to be there. And then so let's just turn that into a bit. And it was kind of bizarre because out of nothing, a lot of a lot of people showed up. I mean, it was hundreds of people showed up. If we had no tickets other than the cover charge at the venue where the bands was, which was like $15, and Trader Vic's was free. We passed a hat to pay the performers, and it didn't cost much of anything, and all of these people showed up from all over the country. And and this is something I've been thinking about in the last week, in preparation for this. I'm thinking about how much other people make these events better. That, the first Hukilau, Sven Kirsten showed up with a slide projector. We stole a tablecloth from a back room and taped it up to the rafters, and he did a presentation in the back room with Trader Vic's. And he just was there. He just showed up. And Judd Finkelstein, his band was there, and they performed without, again, we passed the hat. That's how they got paid. And um, one of the crazy, crazy things, like the Friday night we were at a club, stage, bar, whatever, typical club, and we booked the bands and we booked the burlesque performers who we'd already met at Teaserama that we loved. And I was DJ, and I got there, for this thing. We're there early, and this guy is there who we didn't know, and he'd been there for hours, and they the club owner introduced us to this guy, Wayne Coombs, who we didn't know, and he'd already taken over. He went to Home Depot and bought every Majesty palm that they had. He bought reed fencing and covered the walls, the entire club's walls, and put in palms all around and had his giant carvings everywhere. We didn't know him. He didn't know us. He just came in and did it. And we're like, at start out, we were like pissed off, like, who the hell are you? But then he was just such a lovable asshole that we were like, well, great, he's our best friend, friend for life. And he did that every year. He would just show up at the event at Hukilau and just bring an entire truck, I mean, big U-Haul truck full of stuff and decorate macaws. And so you get people like that, and if you've ever been to any events, there's room parties and those things, and people go all out, and so people bring things to the event that make it more than it ever would be. You kind of make this structure, but then the bands show up, and the bands do things that you never thought about, you didn't ask them to do. The performers, people get up and start dancing, and they're in costumes, and people throw room parties, and so much of the events are created by the people who are just attending, and it's kind of what makes it in a way. And part of it too is, I don't know how, I keep pushing this whenever I'm involved in an event, is you've got to leave time for people to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And get to know each other, because if you make a friend at an event, and then you're likely to come back. And I made so many friends at Hukilau in the beginning that it was like homecoming.
Yeah.
That's something that changed. It was 2005, Hukilau 2005. So up at that point, Tiki events were a party at night. There were bands, burlesque, and people would bring stuff and serve drinks out of their rooms. There were no bars set up. There'd be a bar maybe at the venue or whatever, but nothing organized. And I'm standing there, 2 o'clock in the afternoon with Adrian Estacchio, who you interviewed not too long ago, Polynesian Pop, and he says, "What are we doing? What are we supposed to be doing right now? I mean, what's going on?" And then the light came on. I was like, you're right. This should be more like Comic-Con. There should be seminars. We have friends who are experts in exotica music, carving, history, whatever. And I bet if we asked, they would put together a presentation. And so the next year, 2006, we had seminars, and we scheduled throughout the entire day. And that was the first time there were seminars at Tiki events. And of course, now that's standard. And now every Tiki event is like scheduled from the time you wake up all day long. And it's like, we need to leave some time for people to get to know each other. But the people really make the event. And that's true at the Rockabilly events, when you get there in the 90s, and there's these guys with greasers with the duck tails and cuff jeans, and they got car clubs, which are actually gangs, and at about 1 a.m. they're fighting in the parking lot. This is entertainment that's free. Makes the event better.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you can never schedule in the human element, and especially at Tiki events, after it gets dark and everyone's had a little bit too much to drink, when you're just chit chatting with somebody in line about whatever, you make a really good friend out of it. Like you can't schedule that, and so the people absolutely make the environment. They make the event,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Those first like room parties at Tiki Oasis were just they realized one of the rooms was really huge, and they rented that room and the one next to it, and they took all the furniture out of that room and put it into the room next to it, and then put a bar in there and a band and whatever. And that's how the room party started. They weren't organized. And people just started doing it, and they just showed up with all this decor, and they created this thing. I mean, I'm 1 year at Tiki Oasis when somebody brought a tiny little bar that they set up in the elevator and it had music, and they were mixing drinks and serving to people in the elevator. Nobody asked them to do that. They didn't have any permission. They just did it. And so that's the kind of things that, the community brings to the event that makes it so much better than whatever you're planning.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So you talked a lot about that first Hukilau there at Trader Vic's in Atlanta, but the Hukilau was moved to the Mai-Kai in Fort Lauderdale. Why did that move happen, and how has being in Florida changed the event?
Well, Hukilau historically was about 25% of the attendees came from California, 50% came from Florida, and 25% came from the rest of the world. And the first Hukilau in Atlanta, there were a lot of people from Florida. There were carvers and vendors and just people that ended up being lifelong friends. But two of them were Brielle and Tristan, who Leaky was talking about. And they said, you should do this at the Mai-Kai. And we were like, sure, okay. And those two people really made it possible for us to move the event to the Mai-Kai, and we really intended for the event to move every single year. Trader Vic's, the employees loved us. There were 300-400 people there buying 5 drinks at a time for hours on end and tipping like crazy and had a great time, but the management was terrible to us. And then, so 2003, thanks to Brielle and Tristan, they found the hotel and they helped us organize everything at the Mai-Kai. And we got to the Mai-Kai. This is the early days of the internet. We had a few pictures. We had no notion of what the Mai-Kai really was. It was just this place that everybody said you had to go. And we got there, and what we discovered was that they loved what we were doing. They realized that we were promoting them. We were the biggest event, the biggest group that they'd ever had. The biggest, they looked at us as like a bus coming in full of people, sort of, only different. So we booked all 3 dinner shows. I think we had 750, 800 people that night. And for the Mai-Kai, they served 1,200 people a night for dinner on a regular basis. So this was just normal for them. We weren't overwhelming. Trader Vic's set up extra bars, and we're still not able to keep up. For Mai-Kai, this was just a normal night. Not a normal night, because Hukilau was the best crowd, because they came in early, drank and ate appetizers, did the show, went back and ate and drank, and then the whole group stayed there all night till 5 a.m. eating and drinking until they finally said, okay, you got to go home. But they really embraced us because they realized we were promoting them. We were promoting the Mai-Kai and we got that first year, we had a reporter who shadowed us the whole time. And he wrote like a 6 or 8 page story in the weekly entertainment paper there in Fort Lauderdale. And so that's the kind of press that they couldn't get themselves, but we were able to get it because of what we were doing. And more and more, so Hukilau became connected with Mai-Kai. And from that, I became like Murray Thornton, who was the owner of the Mai-Kai. I became one of her grandkids. She'd call me, I was Ma. She was Ma, my grandmother. And I began to hear those stories because I was on the inside talking to the family, the owners, the employees. They knew who I was, so they would tell me things that maybe they wouldn't tell the average person. And that all evolved into what eventually became the book, because I had this inside thing. And as soon as I went to the Mai-Kai the first time in 2003, I started collecting Mai-Kai stuff and everything I could find, and still collect the Mai-Kai stuff. So, and they were so great that it really didn't make sense to move the event anywhere else. I mean, we talked about doing it at Disney, but Disney doesn't need our money. They don't need any help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How so you talked about your first time going, but like what was your initial reaction? Was it I'm sure it was overwhelming if you only had maybe a postcard or two, had only seen a few photos. But you're walking through this place to scope it out for Hukilau. Do you remember that feeling that you had going through it?
No, it was all a blur really because there was so much going on and we're having meetings and everything. What I do remember distinctly was being there late in the evening after everybody had been served dinner and everybody's hanging out and the band's playing in the Molokai bar and everybody's hanging out and had a few drinks and we're having a great time. And Holden Westland, who is the owner of Tiki Farm, was there with and Bamboo Ben, who you may know is a big bar builder, and Crazy Al, and a, a bunch of us hanging out. And Holden Westland looks at me and he says, Tiki Oasis is shit. My event, he just done an event in Las Vegas. It's Mondo Exotica is shit. Hukilau blew our doors off. Hukilau is the best. And I was like, and it was really the Mai-Kai,
Yeah.
because there's no experience like that. And and just having a great time with, 600 or 800 friends in the Mai-Kai was, an experience like nothing else.
Right.
Nothing else is the Mai-Kai, but being with all those folks and having a great time was also just such a new and fantastic thing in the second year of doing the event. And that's another one that was crazy. So we got a message from this band, the Belly to Waikiki, Italian guys in Italy playing rockabilly and Hawaiian music in English. And they wanted to play at our event. And we kind of didn't know what to make of it, but we said yes. And they flew in from Italy and it was the show's about to start and I'm in the vendor room just hanging out and I hear horns, the conchs blowing. And then I see them walk by, and there's four guys in Hawaiian headdresses, red and yellow feathers and capes and lava lavas, and they've got a leader with another guy. They're carrying him on a leader on their shoulders through the hall, blowing a conch, and that's the band. And we're like, I hadn't even met them yet. And they showed up in these outfits and had this incredible show. And then they get up there and played and blew everybody away. And it was like, oh, I didn't expect that, and again, this is somebody who showed up and did something amazing that made our event so much better, and we had no idea. It was just
Yeah. Well,
Ridiculous.
yeah, on Abe, make a big lasting impression.
Yeah.
So we've talked to Christy White and Jim Hayward and now yourself, and you all say the same thing, is that your personal relationship with the staff at the Mai-Kai is unbeatable. Everyone knows each other. You've all gotten very close, and you mentioned that was a driving factor to write your book. Do you remember a conscious decision to say of why you wanted to write it, or was it a slow progression as you're collecting stories, or just what was the process of decision?
so it started with a lie. So I can't remember what year it was. I think it was 2004, maybe 2005, maybe later. I don't remember. But Jack Thornton, Bob Thornton had died in 1989, who was the owner of the Mai-Kai at the time. But his brother, who had started the Mai-Kai with him, Jack, passed away while we were doing Hukilau, and I heard about it, and I realized he was there. I could have just talked to him. I could have picked up the phone, or I could have gone to his house, and I didn't do it. And all of that history just left, and it just killed me. And I just thought, I can't let this happen. I can't. I gotta try to figure out some way to find people and record the history. So I had a men's magazine. It's probably around here somewhere, a girly magazine, and it had an article about the Mai-Kai and pictures of the Molokai girls and stuff. And it had manager Leonce Pico. And with a name like Leon's Pico, you can Google that, or it wasn't Google at the time. You can search that on the internet and find Leon's Pico. There aren't two of them in the world, right? And I found what I turned out to be his real phone number through the internet, and I decided to call him. And his wife answers, and yeah, I'll get him. And he said, I told him I'm writing a book about the Mai-Kai and I'd like to interview him. He's like, okay. And he says, I'll give you 30 minutes, next Tuesday or whatever. So we had that call, and in 30 minutes, I learned more. I mean, I still go back to that interview. I recorded it and pick up things that I had missed. It was so much information. It was so amazing. But I remember at the end, he said, so you're writing a book about the Mai-Kai, huh? And he's like, I don't think anybody's going to read that. you know, and it was just a job he had. He had no distance from it. He had no concept of it, but he was there for all of those really important things, like the creation of the Molokai bar and the mystery drink and the calendars and all of that. But he didn't think anything of it, and that's the case. You have to have a certain distance to appreciate something. 50 years you destroyed, 100 years you preserve it. We were in that era where we were preserving. We were far enough away to preserve it, and not so close that we didn't give a shit like he did. That was just a job I had. So that's how it started. And he pointed me to Bob Van Dorp. He actually gave me Bob Van Dorp's number. He had found Bob Van Dorp on the internet, and I'm a big Mai-Kai fan. I'd never heard the name Bob Van Dorp. And he said, no, he was the original general manager. I was just assistant manager. And he said, Bob's in Hawaii now, and here's his number. And so I called Bob sometime later, and then we started talking, and that really changed my life, because he had all of the stories. He was there from the very beginning. He's the one that, gave me that connection to Donn the Beachcombers, because he was a 15-year Donn the Beachcomber veteran when he came to the Mai-Kai, and he told me about Mariano Liquidini and all of those folks that he'd stole from Donn the Beachcomber Chicago to found the Mai-Kai. And then, weeks later, I'm talking to him again, and I said, you're working at Donn the Beachcombers. Did you ever meet Donn the Beachcomber, the man, Don Beach? And he said, meet him? Well, he was my best friend. And that just blew me away. He was Don's best friend. When he eventually moved to Hawaii and started working on all these projects. And he hired Donn Beach to work for him, and they worked together on projects for decades. And he was Don's best friend. And he was one of 3 people at Don's bedside when he passed away. He handled Don's funeral arrangements. And so then I got into asking him about Donn Beach. And that's where the Donn Beach book started, was that interview with Bob. And so all of those, and eventually, after I talked to so many people and they all gave me their stories, it was obvious that I had to write the book. I had this notion that maybe I'd give all this information to Jeff Barry or somebody and they would write a book, but then I knew, no, that it's mine. I'm the only one who really has the stories, and I have to tell the stories, because I can't just let this sit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is such a interesting time period, because you do have people who could have been managers of restaurants in the 1940s when you were doing your research in the early 2000s, and still have these people available to talk to. And I've heard you say in other interviews that Phoebe Beach played an extremely important role in your research as well, and you had to go through kind of a process to go find her. Would you mind talking a little bit about that experience and giving Phoebe an introduction for anyone who is unfamiliar with her?
Well, when I started work in earnest to do, I mean, I've been sort of working on a Donn Beach biography since those first interviews with Bob Van Dorp. I obviously had an interest in Donn, and then I got this inside scoop. But one of the things that I felt that I had to have to do, or to really do it right, was Phoebe Beach. Phoebe was Don's 3rd wife, and she was his wife when he passed away. And she and inherited, all of his stuff when he passed away, which was his archive. And then her next husband, Bittner, put together a book about Donn called Scrounging the Islands of Donn the Beachcomber, I think it's called. And he sort of took what she had and kind of cobbled it into a book. It's a weird book, but it was his gift to her to write this book about her. And so I read that obviously and thought there's got to be a lot more to it because a lot of that book is written in the first person. It's like a journal. It's like Donn saying, "I went here and did this," and I'm like, how much more information is there? How much? And so I felt I had to have that information that he had used to write that book to really do the proper book. So I spent years tracking Phoebe down because there was the book and a publisher, and I sent letters and emails to the publisher, and there was a website for the book, and I found information like who registered the domain and all of that, and sent emails and letters to those people, and some of them would just come back to me as one of them. I wrote a letter to an address in Hawaii, which was supposed to be hers, and it came back and said in New Zealand, NZ, and I was just getting nowhere. I mean, I spent years every avenue that I can imagine trying to track her down, and eventually I hired a friend of mine's a private detective, and he said I can't track her down. She's not in the country anymore. And I hired a private detective in New Zealand, and they got her information, and it confirmed what I had, but I had an email, and they were like, "Well, if you want, I'll go talk to her." I'm like, "That's okay." And Bob Pendorp's daughter, was close to Phoebe. Um, Bob had introduced Phoebe to Donn back in the 70s in Fiji when they were working on a project. And so I had Bob's daughter make an introduction to who I was and to Phoebe. And so she, and then she emailed me. She said, "Well, you found me." And I was like, "Okay, great." And she said, and we emailed back and forth for, a week or so. She said, "I've got all the information here, but it's got to stay here with me. You're welcome to come to New Zealand and stay here as long as you need to go through it, and I'll give you full access to it, but you've got to come here." And I was like, "Okay." So I started planning this trip. Like, I figured it would be at least 2 weeks, which was all the vacation I had in the year. My job, I was going to take all my vacation to go to New Zealand to try to figure out how to do something with whatever she had, which I didn't know what it was. And then COVID happened, so I had to cancel that. But that was actually a little later. So that first week I was emailing with her, I'm very excited, and I said, I made contact with his wife, Carla Beach, and we just played phone tag. I called her and leave a message, and then she would call me back and leave me a message, and I never actually got to talk to her. But I saw her estate sale, whatever, and Phoebe emailed me back after that email and said, "Carla was a horrible person. She made Donn and my life miserable. I don't ever want to relive that again. This conversation is over." And that was it. For 2 years, she didn't respond to my emails, and I never heard from her again. And then out of the blue, and I would email her every now and then. I'd find something and I'd send it to her and say, "Well, maybe this is interesting," and nothing. And then out of the blue, like 2 years later, she said, "Well, if you were going to do a book, what would it be about?" And she asked me a bunch of questions, and she liked my answers. And she said, that's when she said, "Will you come here?" And then COVID said no, canceled it. Luckily, I was able to get my $3,000 flight refunded. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I was like, okay, $3,000 flight plus however much it was going to take to stay there, plus my work that I was taking 2 weeks off, and this is, $5,000. Can I spend $5,000 having someone there do what I was going to do and scan everything and take pictures of everything? And maybe we can do that. I called her and she said, well, let me think about it. And then she called me back a week later and she said, well, we just had the executor of our will over here. And we're going over the final plans for our will. And I left everything to you, all of Donn's stuff to you. And I thought, why don't I just go ahead and send it to you now since you're going to get it all eventually anyway. And then you can start using it for your book. I was like, okay, great. It was shock. And she sent it to me. And that took a year of getting somebody in New Zealand to come and pick it up and box it and put it on a plane. And it was a nightmare. And then I got here, it was 80 pounds of stuff, 150 pounds of stuff in 8 boxes, and it was ridiculous. And I started going through it, and it wasn't 6 months after it had arrived when Phoebe decided she wanted it all back and that she didn't want to have anything to do with the book I was writing. Even though I hadn't started writing it yet, she was sure that it was going to be terrible. And it was a nightmare. But thank God she did send it to me, and it's here, and it's going to the Bishop Museum now, so it'll be in their collection permanently, and it'll be available for anybody who wants to look at it in the future. And you know, I didn't learn that much about Donn in the book, in the archive, but there's just a trove of documents and images that nobody's ever seen that were just fantastic. And, you know, having Phoebe be a part of it, even though she's on again, off again, and I never know. She did read the manuscript and she liked it and gave me her feedback, and she's yet to see the documentary because she's not ready to deal with it, I guess, it would be, reliving Don's death again in a way for her that, it's, if you've seen the documentary, that's very powerful for us. For her, I'm sure it's even more so. So she hasn't gotten the courage yet to see the documentary.
Yeah. You're speaking of the film The Dawn of Tiki, which you were an associate producer for. Can you tell us a little bit more about that project and how it came to be?
Well, that happened when Phoebe decided to send me everything, and we were working on the details of that. Was when Max and Alex contacted her about doing a documentary, and she forwarded the email to me and said, "Well, this is your decision now because you have everything." And and I spent a lot of time agonizing over that because I had spent 10 years at least tracking down all these people and getting all this information and putting it all together. And people like Phoebe, who it took years, literally years, for her to talk to me. And Karen's son, Sunny Son's daughter, it took years for her to start talking to me. And I would, now I'm in a place where they trust me and they're friends with me, and I can say, here, we're doing a documentary, and they go, okay, I'll do an interview. Karen's son would have hung up the phone on them. She wouldn't have anything to do with that 3 years ago. So all of this information and all of these people, to just hand it over to somebody else to make a documentary, then I don't know what exactly they're going to do. Is a terrible decision to have to make, because they could make something I hate, or something that was low quality and terrible, or they painted a terrible picture of Donn, or so I had to really just finally just say, okay, I think I trust these guys. I saw the work that they've done on other documentaries, and I think they can do it. And one of the things that was interesting is they came to me and they said, we're Tiki people too. I think maybe one of them had honeymooned in Hawaii or whatever. And I went on Facebook and found both of them, and neither of them had any mutual friends with me. And I thought, you're not really Tiki if you don't have at least one mutual friend with me, So And I thought that was a very good thing because I wanted somebody who was an outsider to um, to tackle this as a documentary instead of as an insider with a certain amount of knowledge. You don't ask the right things, or you don't portray it in a way that will speak to people outside the community. Um, and if you've seen it, they did just a fantastic job. And I held my breath a lot because they would send me early stuff, and I would be like, "Oh God, what have they done?" And I'd watch it and I'm like, "Oh, it's good. Thank God, it's good." And over again, it was just like, "Oh, we're going to see the next cut," and then it was like, "Oh, well, that is really good." And so me coming on early, I introduced them to Holden and Shag to do the mug for the Kickstarter, and then introduced them to Sven and Murray King and Karen Sun and Paul Gant and David Gant and Phoebe Beach, and all those people confirmed with me. I go talk to them, and they're good people, and so it just helped it all come together from there.
Yeah. So, how have you seen both the Dawn of Tiki film and this book that you're putting together kind of change the Tiki revival's understanding of who Dawn is?
I think I'm looking forward to the book coming out because to me, I've been living with it now for years, and I have this knowledge, and it's not new, so I can't. I'm looking forward to people reading the book and having that experience of finding these stories for the first time. And I think it's really gonna. The One of the things I say in the book is I was worried that telling Don's story would ruin it. That he's an icon, he's a mythological person
Right.
in the Tiki community. And when I start telling the real story, maybe it's going to be terrible, and maybe he's not. We're going to push him off his ivory tower. But it turns out that no, he was an immensely admirable person who really was after our hearts. He was an adventurer to the day he died, and he lived the life that other people pretended to. He was the trader, where other people called themselves Trader Vic or Trader Nick. He really was the trader. He sold Trader Vic the decor to turn Hinky Dinks into Trader Vic's, and he was selling all of it. He was, he traveled the world, and he became a Hawaiian. He transformed the island of Hawaii, and he traveled unbelievably his entire life. I mean, it was just nothing for him to just crisscross the globe, and he was as comfortable sleeping in a hammock on a boat as he was in a five-star hotel. And that was just kind of that phrase, the the host diplomats and pirates, and he was really that guy. He was comfortable in any situation with any person, from the lowest to the highest. And that hopefully, the book and the documentary help everybody understand this is where we all came from as Tiki aficionados. This is where it all started. And he's kind of like, if you have a spectrum of this is Tiki done right, and this is something we can all, even Polynesians, can say is a good thing, and this is Tiki done wrong, and we can all say this is a terrible thing. Don is over here. I mean, he's that guiding light that he didn't particularly care for a lot of his imitators on what they did, and it's hard. Nobody can really do what he did. It's not possible. Mai-Kai is actually kind of close, and they have a show that's put on by Polynesians. That's for years it was owned by a Polynesian, and but he is kind of that North Star that started it, and is sort of a goal that we all can look at.
Yeah. I think that's been the very interesting part for me, at least learning more about him, away from just the myth of Don, but learning that he worked basically until the day he died, on every project imaginable, and still getting asked in his later years to work on projects in Hawaii. I mean, he is like you said, he is the actual trader. He lived the life that he kind of said he did. So, do you feel like maybe it did? your idea of Donn change at all through your research? Did it feel like you maybe learned more about him personally and away from the mythos, or did you always have kind of an understanding that he was a real person? He was not just this mythical guy.
The thing that I found in my research that humanized him in a way that I still wrestle with is his relationship with Sonny Sund. And it's a unbelievably complex relationship, and it's still wrapped in the unknown. I mean, I give all the facts I have and my opinion of how all those facts come together and how it really worked. But his his love affair with Sonny and her love affair with him is kind of, I think it's room for interpretation, but I think it's bigger than anything most people experience. It's, she said he was the love of her life, and I can't get into too many details of it. You got to read the book, but in my opinion, um, the bad things that we think of that Sonny did to Donn, I don't necessarily think she did to Donn. I think that the mob forced her to do those things to Donn, and that she did those things against her will, and that they had a good relationship and possibly had affairs throughout their lives and remained close. And it wasn't until Sonny died in 1974 that Donn then became serious about another woman. And his relationship with Carla was a sham, but his love of Phoebe was real. And that happened in 1976. I think Phoebe passing away actually freed him up to be able to love again. It's that aspect of his life is just unknown until now, and you know, I wrestled with it for years, and I still do. And you're going to have to figure it out yourselves too in the book. Where do you land on how it all works out? But that he was a playboy, and he had plenty of lovers, but he wasn't serious about any of them. Apparently, and he didn't settle down. Like I said, his marriage to Carla was more of a guardianship. She said they never had sex, and they were together for 20 odd years. So it's
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. Yeah. I want to jump back to a topic that we were kind of touching on in the beginning. One of the things that I feel I pick up from your research is a preservation mindset while we still have it available, whether that's talking to people or appreciating the architecture, the businesses, whatever it may be. That always seems like it is on the forefront of your mind, if I'm not mistaken. And I have something here I'd like to read. This come from a part of a longer post that you posted on Tiki Central back in June of 2002. At the time, you were talking about an oldies radio station in your local area that you had appreciated because you knew it wouldn't be around forever, and you were seeing things change in some of the desire to listen to that music from the older generations of going away as they passed on. So I'd like to read this. You wrote, the 50s culture we all love here is disappearing in our generation. In a real short time, the people who lived when Googie and Polynesian pop were active will all be dead, and so will their memories and knowledge, and so will all the places that may now cater to them. So you think it's hard to find this stuff now. In 10 years, it will be impossible. So be awake and consider it. Don't take these drive-ins and diners and Polynesian events for granted. I bring this up because in it you say in 10 years it will be impossible, and here we are 23 years later. I'm curious to see if you feel that is still accurate, or if the shift away from the mid-century from the 50s and 60s in the tiki culture did kind of happen as you have seen it and as tiki has changed over the years.
Yeah, as I've been doing research on the Mai-Kai and Donn, there's a part of me that wishes that I didn't have a day job And I had a benefactor who would just pay for me to travel around the country and gather stories and do nothing but that.
Yeah.
And it's so many, people that are in my book that have passed away, people that I've talked to that were part of that book aren't with us anymore, and their stories are all gone. And I think, did I ask enough questions of those people? There are people that I talk to now, and I like it. I think, like, when I was working on the book, I thought, well, I was I was around, in 1989 when Don passed away. Say 1986, I could have gone to Hawaii and talked to him. I could have interviewed him, but I wouldn't have known the right things to ask. So it wouldn't have mattered. I didn't know who he was then, and it wasn't possible. So it's frustrating and painful how many things that I've missed out on and lost, like Bunny Yeager. Like, I sat down with her the night at Hukilau one year, and we had this long conversation about Bob Van Dorp and everything. And I was like, and she says, "Oh, I've got a bunch of photos that I took at the Mai-Kai. I'm gonna put them in a folder for you." And I'm like, great. And I was intending to do a documentary. And I was like, okay, so next year when I come back for Hukilau, I'm bringing a camera. We're gonna sit down and do an interview and then do that. And she's like, "Oh, that sounds great." And I never called her, and I didn't really get into the conversation. We just had a touched on some things. We didn't really have an interview. And then she passed away about 2 months later. And I never got to have that call with her. So many frustrations like that. But it also, if you think about all that stuff, it'll just make you insane. Um, what I tell people all the time is, whatever place you really love, whether it's a restaurant, a bar, whatever, there's probably one person that if they don't get up tomorrow wanting to do that anymore, it will go away. Because all of it's kind of a labor of love. Mai-Kai luckily has made those transitions from owners and over the years, but it's really difficult. And so that's what happened, from the 60s on into the 90s, is somebody who was keeping these places open out of the sheer will of waking up the next morning, and then they pass away or they get too sick or the kids don't want to do it. They're off doing their own thing. And so it just goes away. And so you have to appreciate those things, even if it's your local bar or restaurant that's serving you great tacos, or bakery, any of those places. Somebody is waking up every day saying, "Let's go do this." And if they just change their mind for any reason and they get tired of it, they get sick, whatever, it's going to be gone. And everything that we appreciate is one person away from disappearing, probably. I know that's terrible. It's like vacillating between, like, oh, that sounds very hopeless, to we need to live our life constantly appreciating what's here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I can also, I don't know how many times in the last 25 years I've been told that the Mai-Kai was closing.
Mhm.
I mean, I think I don't know what year it was, but um, Murray Thornton decided to sell the Mai-Kai, and we had a meeting, and they said, "Well, I know you've got Hukilau coming, so here's what we're going to do. Um, we're going to have Hukilau Friday, Saturday, but Saturday we're closing the doors, and that'll be the end. The Mai-Kai is closing for good on that Sunday. We can't tell anybody, because if you tell anybody, nobody will show up for work, and we can't do anything if nobody shows up for work. So this has to stay between the people in this room." And so we're doing Hukilau knowing that it's going to be the last. We announced that this is the last Hukilau. We didn't tell them why. We told them that we were tired of doing it. The truth was, the Mai-Kai's closing on Sunday, and we're not going to go on. And then we get to the event, and the family had discussions, and they sold part of the interest of it to one of the other family members, and so the Mai-Kai didn't close. But that happened many times over the years. But Mai-Kai was closing, and had to deal with, as much as I was so connected to the place and loved it, I've had to deal with its death 3 or 4 times. When the kitchen collapsed, I thought, this is it. I mean, Murray's 76, 78 years old. Uh, the property it sits on is worth $8 million or something. If you had a choice between spending millions of dollars to renovate a business that has 250 employees and you have to work every day at it to make money, or just sell it all off and sell the property for $8 million, not many people would choose the former. And I was very sure that a 78-year-old Murray Thornton would rather walk away. And I was shocked that it didn't happen. I was, you know, I was resigned to the notion that that was the end of the Mai-Kai, and we're going to just live with the memories we had. So even a place like the Mai-Kai, as huge as it is, can be gone. You never know.
Yeah. I think that's the thing I remind people of all the time is that we nowadays, especially as for us,
Yeah.
we grew up only knowing the Tiki revival at this point in this, but also only knowing really the modern world. So a lot of the things that you've described before about the Googie architecture, the things that you grew up, you had a really, I think, a very eloquent way of saying it that you did an interview some years back. You said they're not my memories, but they're in my memories. Saying that you grew up in the shadow of it. And we're in a very similar position with a lot of those mid-century buildings. They're still at risk of going away. So I remind people, go to the old bars while you still can. Don't take them for granted. Just because they've been open for 90 years doesn't mean that they're safe yet. So, I mean, I think that's the advice for a lot of these things, even for the Mai-Kai, even with all the money that's been put into it, you still never know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really been interesting to see the change in the Tiki community over the years. I mean, I remember, so I had my own home bar, and we were recording earlier. That's like the third or fourth iteration of the home bar. But for about 10 or 12 years, we had it at the house we were in previously, and we would have people over. They would walk. We'd have them walk in first, and you'd go from daylight into this cave, of a dark tiki bar, and over and over and over and over again, people would walk in, walk through the door, and go, "Holy shit!" I mean, we would almost just wait for it. When's it coming? Holy shit! Over and over again. And then they'd come in, and we'd serve them drinks and have a good time, whatever. And then one year, this couple came down from Chicago who had been to, Three Dots on the Dash and Lost Lake, and they've been out to California to wherever and all these places. And they walked in and just walked in and sat down at the bar and didn't even bat an eye. And I started serving them drinks, and they were, we talked about the drinks, and it's like something has changed. These are people who for them, tiki bars are a place they can just go to. And the drinks they get, they expect to be really good and really made well. And that shift, that was the shift, where now there are a lot of tiki bars and a lot of people and tons of people have home bars. That's the big thing. I mean, it's become like this cliche. Like every time I go to an event or even go to a tiki bar and I start talking to somebody, they say, "Oh, well, let me show you pictures of my home bar." Everybody's got a home bar, and so it's this, and people are collecting things from the events that they go to, and they collect mugs from the places that they go to. That so many places have their own mugs now, and this new tradition. It's just really different, and it one of the things I think is really important about it is that one of my philosophy is that the meaning of life is creating, and that can be writing or singing or planting a garden, but taking something that's in your mind only and manifesting into the world and creating it. And for a person who's building their home bar, you get an awful lot of that creation out, designing your space and then building, you end up building stuff and learning how to carve and use a router and all that stuff. And so you get that creation, but also when you go to a tiki bar, you experience it because you're you're looking at somebody else's creation. This is something that came out of somebody else's mind. Every tiki bar is different, and whoever is behind that has spent time manifesting whatever was in their imagination and creating it and so it's a very different, there are a lot of different bars out there, but there's only one genre of tiki bar. There's craft cocktails, but if you go to a city and you try to search where are the craft cocktails, that's not as easy as tiki bars. And so people in this community start to just wherever they're going to go to the tiki bar. And it's interesting too, like the Mai-Tai. There's probably 10 recipes that almost every bar has, it's a Mai-Tai, a zombie, a jet pilot, a Navy grog, a Saturn, whatever. Yet you go to 10 bars and have those 10 drinks and they'll be different in every bar because everybody does it a little differently. So there's the creativity there, but also then the home bar gives you that socializing. I like to say, if you're a Civil War enthusiast and Civil War reenactor, you're not going to ask your friends if they'd like to come over and camp out with you in your wool uniforms and really live it up in the 1860s. That doesn't work. Or if you collect Thai beanie babies, like, hey, you want to come over and see my collection? But if you got a tiki bar, you've got vintage tiki decor, aloha wear, serving vintage drinks and vintage mugs while listening to vintage music, and you say, hey, would you like to come over to my tiki bar? People will generally say yes, and they have a good time, and you meet new friends that way, and you turn them on to tiki that way, and then it becomes they start going to tiki bars wherever they go to because hey, I was in New York and we went to here. I was in Boston and we went to here. And they'll tell you about it, and then it becomes a road trip for a lot of people. I've met people who just we're going to hit like 5 cities this week, and we're going to, so there's a strong social aspect to it, and there's a strong creative aspect to it that I think makes it a powerful community. It was powerful for the individual and powerful for the community.
Absolutely.
So you have your book coming out. When can people expect the book to come out, and where can they find the book to buy it? Your book on the Mai-Kai that's already out.
Well, the biography, we're going to be doing a Kickstarter soon. I keep asking the publisher when this is happening. So we're going to do a special edition. That's what the Kickstarter is for, with just extra features. And part of that is it's not so much about the funds. I mean, the Kickstarter is going to be like $1,000 or something. We'll reach that in no time. But it's a help to get an idea of how many copies to print. What's the demand for a book, so that do we need to print 5,000 or 10,000 or 4,000 or whatever, because we don't want to run out, right? But that's probably going to happen soon, and that'll be your opportunity to get the book first. Those people who do the Kickstarter, that special edition will get printed and shipped out first. And then the main release date is right now set for June of next year. It'll be here sooner. I'll have copies right now. They expect to have copies of Tiki Go-Go in March next year. So that'll be your first chance to really to get the book from me, unless you do the special edition Kickstarter book.
Awesome. And where can people find the screenings for the Donn of Beach movie?
Donn of Tiki.
Donn of Tiki.
There we go.
Yeah, just go to the donnoftiki.com. It's with 2 N's, Donn of Tiki. And they've got a continuous feed of the links, and we're working towards we really hoped to have a widespread streaming release. But it just, when the film was in post-production, we had an offer from Warner Brothers, which would put it on HBO Max. But we had to have it done by December 31st, which was not even remotely possible. But it gave us this notion that, oh, we're going to get a streaming deal. And then we got it done and we didn't get a streaming deal. So we're working to this year where if we don't manage to get a streaming deal or a distribution deal with somebody, then they'll be doing that themselves, and it'll be available on a hard copy DVD and also through streaming through some. I don't know the technical details of how that'll work, but you'll be able to just pull it up on your TV like you do anything else. That'll one way or another it will be going out this year. It'll be on wide release, but they're also going to continue to do theater showings right up until the end.
That's awesome. And then what upcoming events do you have that people can meet you in person? And then where can people find you online as well?
So I'm speaking at Tiki, and I'm hoping to plan is to have my book there. I'm also doing cocktail mixers with B.G. Reynolds to go with the book. There are about 50, I think it's 54 recipes in the book, and they call for Donn's original secret ingredients, number 2, number 4, number 7. So I'm producing those with B.G. Reynolds, and they should be ready probably well before Tiki Go-Go. We'll have those there, and I'll be doing a mug with Ikan Bukum that'll be available. And then after that, I'll be doing Hukilau next year is the 25th Hukilau. I'm waiting to hear more about what I volunteered to be a part of this year, but I don't know what that means yet. But we'll see what the plan is, and it'll be a Tiki Oasis for sure. Other than that, I don't know exactly yet. So you can go to Donn-Beach, DONN-beach.com. That's the website for the book and information there. And from there, you can find my Instagram, and you should get on my Instagram because I put a lot of stuff on there. And also Mai-Kai History. Mai-Kai History is the Instagram handle. I put a lot of content there as well. And you can find the book at either place, maikaihistory.com or donbeach.com, the Mai-Kai book.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sitting down and sharing your stories with us.
Yes, this was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right. Aloha, everybody.
Thank you again to Tim Swanky Glazner for joining us on this week's episode. We had so much fun talking, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share your stories, your history, and your true love for the Tiki and all things Tiki revival. You can find Tim on Instagram at swankpad, on his website at swankpad.org, and you can find his research on Donn the Beachcomber and look out for the book that's upcoming on donn-beach.com. It's DONN-BEACH.com.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much, Tim, for coming on the show and talking with us. Like we said in the beginning, your passion for preserving history and talking with people has really inspired us to do what we do. And we couldn't do it without you. And so we really thank you. We thank you for all your history in the Tiki scene, as well as what you continue to do. And like Ellie said in the beginning, we're super, super excited to see the dawn of Tiki, as well as read the upcoming book. So make sure you check that out as well. And keep an eye out for some of the pre-sales for the book that might be coming down your way soon. So thank you again to Tim, and thank you again, all of you, for listening to us on episode 17.
You can always find us on Instagram at The Tiki Talk Show or Kona Cove _Home Tiki Bar. You can click the link at the bottom of the show notes or the description to find our link tree and find where to connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, other ways to find the show. And you can also find Ryley's new show on YouTube at Tiki Today.
Yeah, and keep an eye out for that. I'll have a update, hopefully coming soon. Again, maybe a little bit change to content, but hopefully welcoming a few more people into that project here soon.
Yeah, it's always great when you can share your passion with friends, have that good camaraderie, that good
collaboration.
Absolutely. So I know we're really looking forward to a few things, and we hope that you are too.
Thank you all again so much for tuning in. It was great talking with you, and we hope to talk to you again soon. But until then,
Bye.